and we want it clean. We cannot be saying, oh, it's dirty, we need to clean it from outside. We need to come in and do the cleaning. So without us coming and doing the cleaning, it will remain dirty. So the same thing with the electoral system. We need to get into the system, and right in the system, we begin to change it. Those things we don't want, we begin to democratically remove them, change them. And that is why we're going to get what we want, which will in turn make people's lives better.
Well, we agree, obviously. I mean, the issue is how you keep everybody involved and you don't get people feeling excluded because they're not part of the sort of verbal elite and so on.
All of us are not the same. We have different gifts. And I said, all of us do not have the gift of service. It's not everybody. Some people, their own gift of service is different from others. A lot of people are not verbal.
Did you say verbal?
They're verbal. But they're quite quiet. But behind the scene,
they actually do stuff.
but behind the scene, they do more than that man that is standing before the people shouting. In fact, the man standing before the people shouting does not even do half of what those guys who don't talk at all are doing.
Well, I'm very sympathetic to that.
So they are the engine room. Those guys who are not verbal, they are the engine room. Without them, that guy standing cannot stand. So that is their own area of gifting. And they are so good at it. So the other one standing there, that's his own area of gifting, and he's also good at it. So we have to harness all these gifts.
And recognize. I mean, I've been a management consultant and I've also been a Tesco's floor cleaner, and I really respect good floor cleaners.
You said it all. You said it all. And the issue is that whatever we do, whatever gift we have, we must be involved. But we need people who are selfless, who are sacrificial,
from my point.
and at the same time, they have a keen perception about things that are happening. That's the issue. Because the problem we have is that people in government today are selfish, they are wicked.
They don't think they're wicked, but effectively many of them are.
We don't need their opinion, we know they are wicked.
Okay, I mean...
If they are not wicked, people voted you into government.
But how are you going to stop yourself getting corrupted by the system when you're mayor? You're going to meet nice people, they're going to be very charming, they're going to give you a lot of positive feedback, you're going to think you're great, well you are great already, but how are you I mean, you're going to end up thinking, hey, I really understand things better than the average person on the street, and then you're going to get separated from them. How are you going to handle that?
The point is this: arrogance is not in my book. Pride is not in my book. Self-centeredness is not in my book. What gives me joy most in life is to see an ordinary man on the streets, or to see a poverty-stricken fellow or a helpless fellow, to see that person being helped to rise up to be somebody in life. That is my passion. I do not believe in having £1 million in my account. Why some people are there on the streets and they are dying? Why some people are there on the streets and they are dying?
Thank you very much.
You know, if I have that £1 million in my account, what I'm going to do, I will rather use that £1 million to create something that will get them into employment. I'm not going to lose my money totally. I will use it to create something that will get them into employment, so that they will rise up and they will have a means of livelihood. So, any nice things being said to me will not get into my head. I wasn't born poor.
Which requires the direct democratic engagement possibilities in order to hold it to account.
There's less privilege, but not to destroy those who have made it already. So it has to be balanced.
One of my strong themes is that we're all more equal than we realise, and there's a really good book called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, which explains how, with really working at something, you can increase your rate of mental processing by about 3,000 times. 3,000 times. You get enough layers of myelin wrapped around a particular set of brain cells, and it's like me as an initial pianist against sort of Montalbano or whoever. And one thing I used to do when I was a school teacher, I've also been a head teacher and an Ofsted inspector, was I used to teach gifted and talented people in Brent. And I used to say, if you just realise how clever you can become, you can get there. Like, once I was a deputy head in an East End school, which was in failing special measures, and I took my son in, who was about 10, from a fairly sort of pushy little school in Ealing, and I had him in the same class as the kids I was teaching. There were 3 kids in that class who were ahead of my son. My son got to Manchester University and Harvard University, and they didn't. And that's just, our perception of what is possible. And those guys probably deserve to be, further ahead of the rest of us. But there is this sort of poverty of desire, I think, if you like. I've stolen it from somebody else. I can't remember who.
Poverty of desire.
Thanks for reminding me. I steal from the best.
Well, hello, everybody.
Poverty of desire.
But anyway, we're going to move into a question and answer session now, which is going to basically, I think the format, since people have left, is going to be free-flowing, I think. Less kind of structured in the sense of people sitting there, and obviously we would have a kind of more general free-flowing conversation, discussion, dialogue. We'll start from the beginning, actually. Probably each one of us who have spoken today probably do a sum up first, and then that can lead into questions from the people who haven't spoken. So I was the first, wasn't I? So I should sum up first of all. I think what we've done today is actually something quite significant. What we've done is we've got a bunch of people together who come from different backgrounds, different groups, have had different ideas in different parts of the country and the world, yet have come together in a space and resonated together and spoke about, very similar things. So that's quite significant. I think that is showing something about what's happening, because I can't remember a time of such unity among people. Even though people disagree, people have different ideas, there seems to be an underlying unity between people in the sense that, we know there's systematic failure and we know that there's a crisis. And so this underlying unity is taking precedence over our opinions and our individual self-centered ideas. And not even self-centered, our just general ideas. I think this was touched on, what was your name again?
George.
George touched on this when he was speaking about the fact that there's an opinion situation where people express their opinion, but it doesn't go deeper into how we can actually fix and solve the problems that we face on the planet. And I think that's what we need to move into, is we need to move beyond just kind of superficial everybody having a say and then having a cup of tea or beer, and moving into a dialogue in which we look at solving and fixing the problems that we face. And I think we've all collectively, and the people who have spoken, have addressed that and have looked into that. And so what I want from you guys is to ask questions on, obviously whatever you want to ask, but I think generally it's got to be within that sense of unity rather than a sense of I just want to win a point. So I'll leave it open to you guys. Unless, John, you want to sum up something?
No, not particularly.
Philippe?
Well, I was very happy to see you all there. We expected more people because we had 41 subscribers on the website, sorry. So we expected more people, but very good to see you all there. And yes, there's some kind of unity in what we all said, and what I said in my speech and what was said by the Occupy movement people. And yes, there's something now that is really happening about global governance and European governance. And I personally feel that we absolutely need now to adopt a European constitution, but not a European constitution written by our elites, like the one that was proposed to the European countries in 2005. We now need a European constitution written by, people from the civil society, people, in the civil forces of nations. And these people can contribute, to a full European, because we all have, as I see in my speech, we all have the same fears and the same fear of Europe. It's an old fear. It is decline. It is really something, that there is in every vote, every single vote in the European countries. Every people voting BNP or National Front in France, those people have big fear of decline, and this fear, the better thing, the best thing, to counteract it is just to give another censorship of power with the European Union. And we've got to change this union that has, on many aspects, that does not correspond to a good idea of democracy. And we really have to have more, to get people to participate more in the European debate. And I think in these things we all agree together, and it is quite weird in an English country where most of the people are Eurosceptic, but for good reasons, as I said in my speech. So we had John saying that a global governance was completely necessary and that we needed to implement simultaneous policies. I think he has worked for years, and you just proved that everything was interlinked together, and that in our days no concurrence, no free trade can work with such interlinked goals. And then the Occupy movement has a very good approach on these subjects, and also I'm quite I can't understand why it doesn't work in France, because the Occupy movement works well in.
We've got nicer police.
That's the main thing. They tried in La Défense and they just ripped the tents out.
Yes, but I think they tried. We had some tents also in France in 2007.
You're very good at protest.
Yes, we are very good at protest, but I think the main problem in France is that we still have a communist party that is still powerful, not as powerful as before, but it's still powerful. And I think the candidate of what they call the left front in France, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, will make maybe more than 10%. So it's very difficult for you to be held. But actually, the Communist Party in France exactly just now tries to go in the same way as you are currently going. But yes, the Occupy movement here is giving such a different approach to what is happening. And actually, when I was in France before coming here, I just thought that the English people were all people that were just looking to the history of it, people that did not like, revolutions, because it's exactly what we see from your history. The English history is full of reforms. You've had just one revolution, we had several in France. And this is really something that I found weird and very passionate about when I'm looking at the Charter movement in 1832 with the Reform Bill. And this Chartist movement, it is kind of what we are living today with John and Simple. It's exactly this. It's just pressure groups that are very successful, because 200 MPs, candidates signed Simple, and 40 MPs finally.
23, 24.
20, so it's quite well.
But only very few people it took to do that, and that's the leverage opportunity that we have.
Yes, and this is really something that I perfectly fits, I think, to the English spirit. I don't know how it's simple in France, but I don't think this would be as successful as in Great Britain.
Yeah, it's very early days at the moment, and I think that's why I was talking about global thinking. Most when people really start thinking globally, something like Simple becomes very obvious to them. But most people still think in a very national framework. They want the government to do, and they don't realise that actually governments can't do it unless they work together. And so there's a kind of mental gap, I would say, and that's why something like Simple is very slow to catch on. But I think once people get the idea and see the leverage it can have. I mean, the great thing about the great thing about the Weston-super-Mare example is that our supporter.
I know what is Weston-super.
Do you?
Because yes, I went there for internships in primary school when I was smaller, and I know the MP John Penrose.
Yes.
And I was supposed to work for him this year.
Oh really?
So
Okay. Well, he's the one that signed
Yes.
up.
Yes.
And but the great thing about it was that our supporter in Weston-super-Mare, when John Penrose MP signed up, the supporter emailed me and said, "Yeah, now we've got them all by the balls," right? Because he knew, it was that once John Penrose had signed up, the Labour candidate would have to sign up, and the other ones would have to sign up too. You see, because if they wanted the Simpol vote, they had no choice. So you see, this is, and I think this is exactly the way we have to turn the tables on the political process, but in a way that, I mean, I don't want to say that all politicians need to be forced, because there's a lot of politicians who signed on to Simpol who are in safe seats, but they just think it's a good idea because they, having been in Westminster, they found out how powerless they really are.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good strategy to keep your hand up for a long time.
Well, I just wanted to get everyone to do a synopsis first.
Really sorry for you. Yeah, so, I mean, we all agree we should all be nice, cooperative people. How do we do that? And really good book, Robert Trivers, Deceit and Self-Deception. We all consciously are altruistic. Unconsciously, we're not quite so altruistic. And it's identifying that, as I said to the Bishop of London yesterday, who also feels that he is not listened to enough and is appreciative of the Occupy movement for saying, well, we've been saying these things about the vulnerable people in London for years and years, but now, when the Occupy movement is sort of talking about the homeless people and the people with all sorts of social, mental problems coming out of the woodwork, then, we're getting a little bit more amplification of that. So we all feel that we are decent, nice, good, altruistic people. We also tend to unconsciously promote ourselves, as I'm doing at the moment. What you will also appreciate in what you're saying about we really need collective global cooperation was echoed by a man called Hector Sants, who I'd never heard of until a week or two ago, but apparently he's chairman of the Financial Services Authority, which is supposed to chief executive, who's supposed to sort of guarantee financial stability. Wouldn't that be nice in this country? And we had an audience with him the other day, and he sort of defended what they were trying to do in their own little way. And we said, well, how are you actually going to have stability when you cannot really control the super large banks and so on? He said, basically you've got to have, guess what, global cooperation. So I mean, some of those people realise how impotent they are without that sort of thing. Getting the message across is more difficult, and I suppose the message I failed to get across before was the kind of concentration of money in that top 1%. Basically, there's only so much Petrus, and there's only so many fine products they get. They rush to paper assets. So we've had this bubble in paper assets, and as though their CDOs and all the other financial instruments have inflated and collapsed, we've all been brought down with it, as they have. But there's a metaphor for this. You play the game of Monopoly, and eventually one person ends up as the winner, but then they've got nobody else to play with, so they get to have to pack away the set. Or you put a load of insects and life into a vivarium, and after about sort of 2 weeks, all you've got left is one very fat spider, which then dies. That's the individualistic model for you. And if we carry on the way we're going, even the super rich are going to have no structure to support them as the ultimate sort of expression of that. We've got to have, we've got to get everybody to see.
It's the 100%, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's not
the highest selfishness is a form of altruism. Then we've got
Yeah,
some-
Jean.
Can we have questions?
Yeah.
Are we having a question and answer session or just a general forum? I mean, I don't mind going with it. Okay, we'll decide. We'll go from question and answer to forum.
A quote that I thought that the Occupy guys might find quite nice, and then ask a question around the Occupy encampment for the panel to muse over for a little while. The quote is from Louis Bandras, who was Supreme Court Justice from 1916 to 1939. And he said, we can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of the few, but we can never have both. So you might find that useful.
This is what we
Yeah,
do when we agree.
I agree.
The question is, this week I've been informed that the St Paul's Occupy group have been placed on the police's domestic terrorism watch list. Why and how, in a democratic country, can a peaceful protest become a terrorist organisation?
Because we don't have real democracy. I mean, there are very important things that we really need to protect and recognise are the product of serious struggles of millions of people in the past for the rights that we do. I mean, the very fact that we haven't been mowed off by the police, or that, I mean, even worse, that we don't disappear into the back of vans and end up dead in ditches a few months later, which is what happened to tens of thousands of people in South America, enacted by military rulers trained by the Americans. So there are very real sort of democratic protections we have, but in terms of anything like the ideal of democracy, where we genuinely have a system that seeks to represent both the interest and the will of the people, we're absolutely nowhere near there. And I think your quote really goes to the heart of it. There's the church has stopped us putting things up between their old-fashioned lampposts at the moment, so that what would Jesus do and the real democracy now thing that we had before have been moved. But so the most visible thing there is now is a quote from Rousseau, which I can't remember exactly, but it's roughly the same thing. It's like, no man shall have so much that he can enslave another, or anyone so little that he is thus enslaved, or something along those lines. And the reality is that democracy is obviously not just about ticking a box every 5 years. What it really means for the people to have power is something that has to be an ongoing experiment. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, and I'd love to have had the time to talk about earlier, is what I call poaching. Now, poaching basically is what the economically and politically powerful will do to any attempt to really reform things and make things better and redistribute wealth, etc. As well as a word that we can identify with, it's also an acronym, and it stands for the principle of anticipated co-optation and hollowing out. So the idea is that the powerful, left their own devices, when you try and make change, will take over the process of reform and empty it of substance. And the fact that those two things go together is very important, because in the climate change narrative, for instance, people say, well, do we really want the solutions to climate change to involve the very oil companies that have caused the problem getting richer? But it's a false question, because this process, time and time again, of when you allow the powerful to take over an attempt at reform, they also hollow out of substance, means that there is a very, very necessary sort of democratic need to, whenever you fight for reform, to be wary of those two processes. I'll give you a few concrete examples of this. Poverty reduction in the last 30 years. So much international aid to help the starving in Africa goes to PricewaterhouseCoopers to do,
risk assessments.
To do a risk assessment and consultation for the government of Zambia or whatever it is that decides that, of course, the government of Zambia should privatise all their industries, etc. Are you totally self-serving?
They're spent on American goods.
Exactly.
American
We're going to give you aid, i.e., our surplus farm produce, which is totally unfairly supported, etc. Climate change, again, you've got massive green imperialism going now, like 1,000 different ways that the powerful have come up with to use the idea of dealing with climate change, carbon markets, land grabs, etc., the economic stimulus, to name something sort of more seemingly more relevant to more people at the moment, even though climate is the most important thing, that all this money that we were using to stimulate the economy has done absolutely nothing of the sort, because the money was co-opted by the incredibly powerful, so it ended up basically more money into the same black hole. And the black hole is not just a black hole, like in the blackness you get vast amounts being siphoned off into tax havens, etc. So the point being that stimulus has effectively not only been co-opted but hollowed out as well, so we haven't stimulated the economy at all. So that we need to have this principle of anticipated co-optation, hollowing out the idea of poaching at the forefront of our minds whenever we try and bring about change is very, very important. And I think this speaks to the link between the Occupy movement and its persistence and its sort of vigilance about power, and these great ideas like simple and democratic reform, etc. So
yeah, no, what I want to say is that actually this co-opting problem, which you're absolutely right about, actually, which is total, it is actually kind of inevitable when things are still at the current within the current nation state system that doesn't work anyway. So like everything, whatever, any good thing ends up being perverted and co-opted, because until you actually move up to the next level of governance.
Yes,
in a way, I mean, you're absolutely right, and in a sense, the way to anticipate the poaching is to realise that you do need to move up to the next level, and to make sure that process is moving up to the next level is independent and works through the system but isn't of the system, because if it becomes of the system, it gets co-opted.
Sure.
But
it's vigilance at each time, basically, that's required.
But let me say this, I think another point is that ordinary people, everyone's ordinary people, but someone's got a mortgage, works for a bank, these people are not going to become part of the process. They are going to want a negotiation process and a representative process come about at a global level. So this direct democracy idea I totally support, and it's got its place in the big mix of things. But in my view, you also need a representative arm as well, which is people standing up globally as a negotiation process. Because people who live, not everybody wants to be part of that process. So in order to be truly inclusive, you have to go beyond the fact that the process is in itself an exclusive idea, which is good, I'm not knocking it, but to go beyond that kind of meme within itself, you have to begin to see that there's people coming from different points of, people who want to buy things and, want to be part of something different, and people who want to be part of churches, so there is different people from different parts of the world. And the movement has to become inclusive of all these people who are not going to actually understand what the hell the Occupy movement's about. So which is why we need the representative side,
Number of points. Just to answer that latest one, I think it's quite an organic process. Each Occupy is different and is representative of the circumstances that it finds itself in locally, nationally, and so forth. Going up to the global level, yes, I understand that what you're looking at is basically sort of like problems of the commons. I mean, as famously said, Holland's Hertzman, tragedy of the commons, potentially looking to game theory, etc., all the rest of it. Okay, that's one thing. But if you look, in some ways, at the EU, which was originally a very progressive project, which has been, in my mind anyway, completely perverted by the neoliberal methodological individualists' right. You basically look at, yes, these problems do need to be dealt with globally because they are a global problem, and nation states, in a sense, are a hindrance in that sense. But the problem that you find is that the more you go to a global level, the more people you have, the further you remove it from people's ability to imagine scale, and also the further you get it away from people's ability to ensure accountability and transparency. I think I want to bring it back down to this idea of representative democracy. Well, who exactly do they represent?
But not in the current format, I agree.
Who does who represent?
Well, current format, you're right.
Well, exactly. In the current format, I don't know. I mean, in the UK case, you have, and I'm going to be slightly pejorative, 2.5 parties, but you get to choose amongst every 4 years, and then forever hold your peace. Or
Well, this is what democratic reform is all about.
in
what's
civil
that?
society and so forth.
You get
So
the essence.
what's that got to do with global level?
Well, what it does is that you also you do have a hollowing out of state at national level. I think people have started mentioning this because of the rise of corporations, finance, and so forth. You take and also blocks like the EU, like NAFTA, etc. You take power away from the nation state. What I feel is, the global level is all well and good as long as you have adequate safeguards to make sure that it is still democratic, at least hopefully quite democratic. That's one point.
Yeah.
The other one is, and also taking on board issues of climate change, peak oil, etc. Maybe you should also be looking at relocalizing a lot of things, rebuilding community, going away from this whole concept of methodological individualism, something that was, for example, in the UK, burst open.
Can I just that would be the first thing we have to do is to differentiate between, if you take a whole list of demands, one big long list, what we want to see in the world, and then we need to differentiate, we need to separate those into two pots. In other words, what can we reasonably expect an individual government to do on its own, regardless of what any other government is doing? So if we put those policies into that pot, and we'll pursue them in a particular way through NGOs or political parties or traditional methods. And then in the other pot, what policies really need a global approach? Now, for the global approach, there isn't any established way of pursuing those. Simpol could perhaps be one, but that's without differentiating between those two different categories of policy, we're just lost, because then it's just one big muddle, and everyone's shouting, "Well, we want this, we want that," and there's no system in it. There's no order. And then our focus, frankly, we talk about Occupy and what's happening now, but I mean, all the way back to Seattle in 1999, when they, freely declared victory over globalization, when they brought the WTO meetings to a halt. I've been around. I'm probably the oldest one in the room here. Apart from my brother or you. But we have kind of heard it all before, and the reason we're not getting anywhere as a movement is because we're not differentiating between these two fundamental types of policy and working out the right way to pursue each type, in my view.
So what is the answer again?
Okay.
Did we?
Well, as I say, I think for global policies, I would have a look at Simpol.
Right.
For nationally implementable policies, well, there are political parties, there are NGOs, there are all the standard methods.
Do you think that local goes against global, or is there a way of having?
Well, I think they're complementary, actually.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Because,
Yeah.
for example, I mean, if you had a global tax on fossil fuels, just talking very crudely, what would happen? The cost of shipping goods all the way around the planet would go massively up. Local economies would be massively boosted because it would become much more competitive to consume and produce locally.
Yeah.
So that's how you marry global with local.
Right, I'm going to try talking loudly and see if I can get the camera focusing on me. I really do have a question. I absolutely agree with the broad principles of Simpol, as I've just learned to understand them. My question is the democratic accountability of a global elite. I mean, I have a friend who's worked with the United Nations, and it's definitely sort of downgraded his opinion of the United Nations. There is a lot of corruption there. I mean, it strikes me as a lovely job being one of the representatives of this sort of global international thing. But how do you stop yourself getting corrupted, just in the same way that national governments get corrupted?
Let me answer on Simpol. Simpol has absolutely no influence on what the content of its policy is. No, the only people who decide that are people citizens who sign up to it.
Yeah.
I have one point which is potentially contentious, which is this underpinning both the economic and environmental crises is basically a crisis of ethics, morality, spirituality, however you choose to define it. Basically, whatever it's going to take to make people think of others before themselves, of the common good rather than the personal and individual good. I think that's quite crucial.
I want to come back on that, because actually cooperation doesn't actually have to be about self-sacrifice.
No.
Cooperation is actually, to my mind, it's about self-interest.
Yes, well,
So if you separate the two types of policies out, first of all, you can then see that it's actually in my self-interest to cooperate on global policies, and it's in my self-interest to cooperate, to work nationally on national policies. So you actually, by separating, you actually integrate the two. You don't. They're not either or. They become a both and.
I think in 2012 we're going to get that. We're going to get a unification moment, a unification process of all different organisations who are going to look at one another and say we've actually got to create an alliance, a cooperative alliance, a global cooperative alliance. In my mind, that is the only way. In my mind, it's a unification of all the NGOs, all the people who want to make a change. Who do. There are a lot of people who care. We wouldn't be in this room now if we didn't care. The Occupy movement cared. So they're already. They don't need to be converted. It's not as if we still need to convert loads of people into being cooperative. There are enough people. It's just need to be organised, and that needs to go beyond the Occupy movement. In my view.
George and I think the guy who's sitting in the front row drumming his fingers wants to say something.
Yeah.
I like his glasses.
Okay, put me on the spot now. I was thinking inside of my mind, but okay. My problem is if we want to have pragmatic democratic reform, it needs to be a really large scale movement. There needs to be millions of people involved. Otherwise, we can't just change the institutions of the past without the appropriate levers of power. And I don't see how we can influence a large amount of people to come out of their apathy and want to participate if we don't create channels of communication which will allow people. I think that education is very important, but how do you implement that as well? Yeah. How do you, education is such an incredibly complicated political problem, and there's such a huge dispute of power surrounding it.
But I think
let me finish. So how can you how can we influence on that level if we already need that level of influence to get it started? So we need to change education to get it all started, at least I think. But how can we change education if we already need to have that amount of power to change education?
Well, you focus on the people.
I think there's two hands up here.
Yeah, go for it.
I think two things. One of which is you have to look at the power that an individual has. What power does the individual have? The power of their labour, which they can choose to remove, and I know that that's no longer very popular, but it's still very true. The power to vote and the power to spend as they choose. And on those three axes, should you not be completely destitute, blacklisted, and just unable to work? There are some people that fit into.
Oh, that's me. That is.
But those are potential tools. But just I think with Margaret Thatcher's just assault on the unions and the working class, which is not irreversible. We had recently on November 30th, by various accounts, quite a lot of people, shall we say, to be uncontentious, of people out on the streets. And I think protesting about their pensions, they should also be protesting about below inflation pay rises, etc. basically pay cuts.
So what about answering his
Sorry,
question?
my bad. But
It just goes everywhere. There needs to be a coordinated, organised.
sorry, I'm tired.
I also have an answer.
We wish
of
we could
sorts.
coordinate and organise better.
But no, it's good. But this is the thing. In my view, we have to move beyond just everybody having their say. What we need to become is active participants and leaders, collective leaders.
Okay, that's yet another issue. To respond to the gentleman or the comrade on the front row, first of all, there's a quote from Margaret Mead which goes roughly, never underestimate. Your question was, how do we get this out to the world? Never underestimate the capacity of a small group of people.
Never doubt that a few concerned individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Thank you very much, George. And my second response, so is it an education problem? As a former lead Ofsted inspector, I know much less about education and broad general principles than people who are more remote for it. So I'm not sure it's an educational problem. I think it's a problem of incantation. You go on saying the same thing again and again, and if it's true, it will catch on. And the reason I really had my hand up all the time was to push back at the people at the front when I said, I have to face up to people within the Occupy movement who say, hey, pretty much all global cooperation, it's going to lead to evil global government. They're ever so corrupt. What do I say to them to puncture that particular balloon?
What you said is basically right, is that it appears that, of course you do ultimately need masses of people, no question. But the way that happens is by small initiatives starting up, and it's like it's actually a bit like natural selection. The ones that are best suited will fit, and they'll reach a tipping point, and then you'll get your millions. So that's the way these things go, and it's never been different. So I wouldn't, it will need millions, but the millions will come from, small initiatives gradually.
Chipping away the block.
Either catching the imagination or not. Just to answer your question, is that there was a great American general who said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Right? And I think that's what's happening at the moment. We citizens around the world, we're on the menu because we're not at the table. Simple is the way we can get to the table. Right? And if we had more time to answer your specific points, Cyril, about democracy within Simple and accountability, I can, but now's not the time.
And the ladies?
I was just going to go back to the point that Cyril made about the fact that we have the ability to withdraw our labour as a way of informing disgust or contempt with what the government's doing, etc. But when people strike or when there are protests on the street, nothing seems to happen. Would it be better if we were campaigning for work to rule? Would it be better if we were campaigning for work to rule as a short-term measure while we're waiting for Simple and DRM, etc. to take off, rather than continuing to support strikes and protests that we know are having no effect?
What work to rules?
Literally that. When you have your contract and you
it's kind of like
only
a
do
go slow,
exactly
okay.
what is on your contract, you don't do overtime, you don't do any holiday cover, you don't do any sick leave, you just literally do the bullet points on your contract.
I think to say things like strikes don't make a difference or protesters make a difference, I think we need to be very realistic about the need to up the ante, but at the same time you never know, which butterfly flapping its wings ultimately is going to lead to something else. But the reason Occupy is significant, I think, is that it is a kind of an embodied meme, and that's the big difference. It's an embodiable meme, Occupy.
Wow.
So what we have, increasingly in the next 2 or 3 years, is going to be thousands of locations across the country where a bunch of local people are incensed that the library is being shut down, a bunch of local people are incensed that the community centre is being shut down, a bunch of mothers who are incensed that their kids who are desperately trying to stay in school against all the odds and not getting their EMA, that disabled people's mobility allowance has been cut. Those people coming out, so this is kind of what I was saying before, but coming and demonstrating in public through occupations that they are, not just that they're concerned, because politicians' response to people saying they're concerned about stuff is for them to say, yeah, we care too, honestly,
So you think
and nothing changes.
strikes as the normal form of protest?
Well, I think they need to be, in addition to, like, it has to be game changing. Yeah, exactly, both and. We need, I think you're absolutely right that looking at the last 20 years, like certainly the scale of the protests and the scale of strikes, etc., has been nothing like enough to really get the ones.
Yeah.
So it's adding to that, and as I said before, again, the significance of Occupy is that it creates, it's disruptive and therefore a strong form of protest, but it's actually about creating a conversational space, a democratic space.
I totally agree with you, but what we also say, I think as you said, it's either or, it's both.
Yeah.
In the sense that what's got to happen is we've actually got to start then creating actually start a people-centred process.
Quite right.
In which we need a global governance structure in place that's based on ethics and wisdom and compassion and all these things.
But that's the end of the process,
which goes above and beyond the IMF and the World Bank, because without that you can't do anything.
But I think the danger is that people think, if protest is a first step towards, things like civil or moving beyond protest, that's fine. But I think the danger is that
Occupy is not protest; it's social movement.
Or social movement, but
both.
It is both, but it's crucial that it's not. If it were just protest, it wouldn't be a game changer. The fact that it can be the kind of space where exactly, we want you to come and talk to the Texas University. It's about creating those spaces where people can suddenly feel empowered that their voices are moving into a politically relevant space.
But not everyone's going to do it.
No, absolutely. Of course, not everyone is going to do it, but way more people, I think, are in their own minds concerned to the point where they do want change than are currently taking action.
I mean, this is the thing. It's not against or for. It's like the Occupy movement is totally and utterly embedded in all of this. Absolutely, I'm fully supportive of the Occupy movement. But I also recognise that there's something greater than the Occupy movement that needs to happen.
Occupy
has lightning rod.
Do you mind if I say one thing? I think one of the things that Occupy is struggling with, and that also possibly reflects a wider malaise, is concepts of ego, basically versus basically non-hierarchical, to allow each person, according to their means, possibly to misquote a famous phrase, to contribute something useful to that society and not to be abused in that process. Also, I think another issue that's quite important is people often state things in terms of either or. When we're looking at this on the whole local, regional, national, local, national, regional, global, or possibly at both ends actually on that one. It's not really either or. It should really be happening at all of these levels, especially, for example, if you're looking at issues of climate change, etc. It's okay, for example, the COP17, it's probably going to be a complete washout. We'd like there to be action at that level, but whilst that's not happening, why not have action at national and at local level? Because, okay, well, at least it's doing something. This whole concept of having action,
That'd be fantastic.
do what you can. Personally, within your community, within your city, country, or whatever. Whatever can be achieved.
I totally agree with you, but we've also got to then, that's not actually going to change the structure. What's got to happen is we need a global movement that is actually about, we need something different in place, which is a global governance structure that's based on people-centred contribution and also based on ethics, wisdom, and what's right for everybody. And they're both together. And the
wisdom requires understanding how likely it is to be co-opted. I mean, one of the things I find fascinating at Occupy is that so many things you hear people say, which are absolutely right on, very close to the things that Cameron is always saying. Like, we're using localism,
big society.
Big society.
It's got to be reality.
That's the thing, and understanding on an increasingly sort of practical level how it is that those narratives are basically public relations, propaganda. They are front for the mechanisms of economic power working in a very sort of systematic way. That's why sort of having protests at banks, at public relations companies, at newspapers, occupying libraries, etc. All those kind of things are part of raising the awareness on a more practical, embodied level
Absolutely,
of where the
they've all got
problems
to
are.
play.
So
What
that's
I
what
think
gets us
is
towards the possibility of meaningful
is the
work.
Occupy movement is itself one kind of level of thinking, but it's not going to translate to everybody. What I'm saying is there are people who work in banks who are not bad people. They've just got jobs in bank,
But we're talking to them. You have not.
I know. I understand that.
We're having so many interesting
I understand that
conversations.
everyone, but not everybody. It's I'm not against the Occupy movement. Basically, I'm just saying that it needs to transcend and include the Occupy movement.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's why we're here, and absolutely
Exactly.
include.
There is this business of how do you link occupies considerable influence now.
Still quite small.
Yeah, but it's still, you've got buildings. How do you interface that with a political mechanism that actually drives the existing political system towards where we want it to go? And that, because otherwise, that's what bothers me, is it's just going to be the 99% engine going at full rate.
Oh, and I agree with your metaphor, absolutely. But that mobilisation is what makes it more possible. Because there are very strong lines between the
interface the political system in a way that everybody can support.
Sure.
And that's where I think we could have something to do.
Yeah.
And this is what we've all articulated earlier, that it's not either or. It is both, isn't it? Both.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to have to wrap it up now because we're going to be kicked out.
So one last point. So
Yeah, well,
I forgot now.
Quick, man.
Something along the lines of this, I guess. It's amazing how a small number of people can actually have immense political change. I mean, in this country, you get a petition of 100,000 people, you will actually have some impact. You get a petition of 1 million people, it's just a piece of paper that people have signed. These people are scared for their re-election, and therefore they take a calculated risk, and that is power. If you believe enough that you can have that change and get enough like-minded people with you, you will have that change. Now, if you look at things like Avaz, 38 Degrees, whatever else, many people can be quite cynical with collectivism and so forth, but okay, and you do need to have physical actions and so forth, but not everybody can contribute on that level. I think somebody once said to me, the left has always made a mistake. It has always assumed that people are willing to do more than they actually are.
They didn't turn up tonight.
Well,
that's good.
And as such,
that's right. So I mean, that's what excites me about the possibility of putting something together that you guys are doing. Because simple is kind of collectivism in a way. But it uses the vote. That is the short-term for the politicians.
It's bringing, it's unifying, it's the unification process.
24 hours or 48 hours in the skin.
Politicians are running around.
And I will sleep with them.
Okay.
Create a buzz with
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So that's, I think on that note, unless you, obviously we can go in the bar and have a...
Hey, to the bar!
Cooperation.